Hey friends, Travis here. Thanks so much for joining us here online. Whether you're part of the Canvas community near or far, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of what God is doing here in San Francisco. You know, Canvas started in 2013, and when we started this church, it was full of prayers to see this church become a rooted community here in San Francisco that would show up and serve San Francisco in creative and impactful ways. And for the first 10 years of our existence, God has done an amazing work. But we are so excited to share that for the first time since we launched in 2013, Canvas has a long-term home right here in San Francisco in the beautiful Presidio. But now we need your help to turn this building into a home for people to experience the fully alive life of Jesus for years and years to come. We are currently launching a campaign called the Here to Stay campaign, where we are seeking to raise $1.3 million that will help us build out this space at 385 Moraga Avenue from one open space into 4 purposeful spaces that will not only serve our community on Sundays, but even more, it will serve the community every single day. This is an incredible opportunity that I would love you to consider joining us on and being a part of what God is doing here in San Francisco. For the first 10 years of our church, we have been committed to you, and now I'm asking, would you be committed to Canvas and help turn this vision of building San Francisco and flourishing San Francisco right here at 385 Moraga Avenue into a reality? We can't do it without you. So head over to www.canvas-sf.com/here to stay to learn more about our Here to Stay campaign and to join us in this impactful work right here in San Francisco.
We're going to talk about silence, solitude, and stillness. And to sort of tee it up, I want to show you my favorite headphones. Now, it's not just because they're Apple products. That's a large part of it, but I'm an Apple snob. Anybody else here in the room, Apple snob? All right, anybody here, you're like PC all day? All right, I just need to know who I need to pray for. All right, I see you in the back. All right, I see that hand. But I'm a total Apple snob, I'll tell you. Like, if they released a toilet, I would buy it. Like, I love all things Apple, and these are by far my favorite piece of technology. And I'm just gonna put it on real quick. They're not my favorite piece of technology because of the quality of sound that they create. And they're definitely not my favorite piece of technology because of how they look. Because let's be honest, Apple, we gotta do better than this. This looks like 2 marshmallows glued to the side of my head. But they're my favorite headphones, not because of the quality of the sound that they make, ironically. They are my favorite headphones because of the quantity of sound that it removes. The noise cancellation features on these headphones are superior to any other headphone that I have ever worn because all I need to do is just hit this one little button and it goes, dong. I can't even really hear anybody. Go ahead and talk right now. Yeah, Jenna's pretending to talk. All right. Just from a little touch of a button, all the noise that is around me completely disappears. And I don't know if you've noticed this. Have you noticed that in most headphones these days, the like premier feature isn't so much anymore about the quality of sound that the headphone creates, it's about how much noise it can cancel out. That people will pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for headphones that will remove the noise around them. And I wonder if what we're desiring in headphones these days is indicative of maybe something we're desiring in our souls these days. That we're longing for a way to remove the noise that is constantly always going on around us. That there's something deep within us longing to escape this noisy world, to find silence and solitude and stillness in this noisy world. And we struggle to figure out how to do it for ourselves. So instead, we wait for Apple to manufacture that experience for us, and we will pay good money to be able to have that whenever we need it. Wouldn't it be nice? I should take these off. I think that's a distraction. Wouldn't it be nice if life afforded us a little button that when you just touched it, all the noise around you would disappear? Wouldn't that be absolutely incredible? I don't know if you have a family member that maybe is just like, they're always just telling you way too much information. Does anybody have family members like that? If they're not sitting here, I won't tell them you said this, but like, there's no such thing as a short story with this family member. And when they get sick, they feel a need to tell you every single disgusting detail of the sickness, like size, shape, smells, cadences. Like they want to tell you all of it. And you're sitting there. Don't you just wish you just had that noise cancellation button, and they would just fade away? Or if you're a parent in this room, come on. Like I know that you wish you had a button that would cancel out that noise whenever your kid is asking you for the 100th time in the last 10 minutes, will you play a game with me? And you're just like, can I please? I just need the button. Or maybe for some of you, it's that family member that every time you get together, you're single and they always show up and say, hey, so when are you gonna get married? Don't you wish? Like you could just completely mute them in that moment. It'd be awesome. But you know what would be even better than a button that could turn down the noise all around you? Would be if there was a button that could turn down the noise within you. You know what I'm talking about? Like when that insecurity starts talking, wouldn't it be nice to just have a button that you can hit and all of a sudden you no longer hear that voice? When that voice of anxiety or fear begins to speak up loud, when it begins to speak over all of your life, don't you wish that there was just some simple button you could hit that all of a sudden, all of that noise, all of those voices, that it would just be muted. It would just all fade away. Well, sorry, life doesn't give you that button, and we all know that. But I do believe God gives us something that can help accomplish the stillness and calmness in your soul that you're longing for. And what God has given us is prayer. And today I want to talk about how through a practice of silence and solitude and stillness, that you can find some peace and calm and quiet in your noisy soul that maybe you have been longing for. If you're taking notes today, I'm sort of proud of the title of today's teaching, so I'm going to share it with you. I work hard on titles. This one I'm particularly fond of. It's kind of long, but here we go. It's this: How to Find Quiet in a World That Won't Shut Up. Come on, somebody. How do we find quiet in a world that won't shut up? You don't even need to believe in God to want to know the answer to that, right? That I'm sure all of us at some point in time are like, I wish I could find some quiet because this world just is so noisy. My life is so noisy. My kids are so noisy. My relationships are so noisy. My job, everything, life is noisy. It won't shut up. How do I find some quiet? We're going to talk about that today because not only do I believe you can find peace and calm through silence and solitude and stillness, not only do I think you can find that, I think you must. I think you must find a way to experience that in your soul. Why? Because I think the noise in your life may be one of the greatest threats to your spiritual growth. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that one of the greatest threats to your spiritual growth may not be an abundance of sin, it may actually be a lack of solitude. That the thing keeping you from growing, from moving forward, from experiencing God in a deep and intimate and rich way, it may not be that you just have this abundance of sin in your life, but it very well could be that you have a lack of solitude in your life. Like, when was the last time you sat like more than 5 minutes in total stillness and silence and didn't check your phone, didn't look at your watch? You were just where you were in that moment in time. See, I think we got to figure this one out because life is noisy. And I think our souls long for calm. It longs for peace. It longs for stillness. And I actually think listening is really at the heart of the power of prayer. A lot of times when we talk about prayer, what we talk a lot about is talking to God. But I actually don't think the power of prayer lies in us talking to God. I actually think the power of prayer lies more in God talking to us. It's not in us talking to God that we experience the power of God in a profound way as much as when we are silent and allow the creator of our souls to talk to us, to speak to us, to meet us right where we are as we are in that moment. Henry Nouwen, he put it this way. He put it a little more bluntly than I do. He says, without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside time to be with God and to listen to Him. Pretty straightforward, right? My man Henry's not playing around. He goes as far as to say, you don't even take your spirituality all that serious if you don't practice silence and solitude, which I would tend to agree. Because if you don't practice silence or solitude, then you're not creating a space where you can actually hear God speak to you. Some of you are like, I never hear God speak to me. When was the last time you listened? Like, when was the last time you were still long enough, quiet long enough, calm long enough, undistracted long enough to allow God to begin to bring some things to your attention? That's what we need to talk about today, because I think your spiritual growth depends on this. So Matthew chapter 3, verse 16 through 17, through chapter 4, verse 1, there's this critical moment in the life of Jesus, but what I want to look at is not just the moment, I want to look at the moment after the moment, because it's the moment after the moment that we learn something about how Jesus approaches solitude and silence, and it shows us why we need it as well. In Matthew chapter 3, it says this: as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. And at that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. Which, by the way, this reminds me, next week, we're going to be baptizing someone here at Canvas. It's going to be absolutely, yeah, we can clap for that. That's somebody making a step of faith. I think is awesome. And so if you want to be baptized and have not been baptized yet, you can still be a part of that. Let us know on the Connect card. There's a box there saying, I want to be baptized. Drop it off, or just come talk to me after service. We would love to baptize you next week, but it's going to be awesome, so make sure that you're here. I can't promise the sky's going to open up and a dove is going to rest on this person's shoulder and God's going to speak, but it will be powerful and we will celebrate what God is doing. So Jesus is baptized here. Pretty powerful moment. Sky opens up. God speaks audibly, and then verse 17 says this, and a voice from heaven said, this is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. This is the moment. But I want to look at the moment after the moment, which is in verse 1 of chapter 4. It says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. So Jesus has this amazing moment where he is baptized. And you need to understand a little bit about what is happening here. This is sort of the official inauguration of Jesus' earthly ministry. It was sort of the starting point. You can think about it this way. Jesus just got promoted to like the CEO of humanity by God, right? Pretty big deal. And I don't know about you, but I don't know if I would do what Jesus did next if I got the biggest promotion of my lifetime, right? Like, what would you do if you got the promotion you were vying for? What would you do if you got the promotion that you've been working so hard for? It aligned perfectly with who you were. It's the dream job. Chances are you would celebrate, right? Chances are you would turn up. You would pop some bottles of champagne. Like you would bring all your friends, all your family over, and you would celebrate. And that is exact opposite of what Jesus did next. Jesus didn't turn up. He turned down. Instead of celebrating with people, he goes into the desert, or your Bible might say the wilderness, and for nearly a month and a half, after getting the promotion of a lifetime from God, becoming the Messiah of the world, he goes alone in silence and solitude for nearly a month and a half. And what's interesting about this is when you read your Bible, it says wilderness or desert, but the Greek word is this Greek word eremos. Everyone say eremos. And eremos can mean wilderness and it can mean desert. It's not totally inaccurate, but it can also mean a solitary place, a lonely place, or my personal favorite, a quiet place. So Jesus gets the promotion of a lifetime, and what he does next is he goes into a solitary, lonely, quiet place for nearly a month and a half. He goes into the eremos. And it would be after this month and a half of solitude that Jesus would have the strength and he would be empowered to step fully into the calling that God had on his life. It's almost as if the Spirit of God knew that before Jesus can fully step into what God had put him on this planet to do, that Jesus was going to need to find his strength. And what's interesting is that the way the Spirit saw it best for Jesus to find his strength was through solitude, through silence, through going into the eremos. See, for a while, I used to believe the desert, the wilderness, was sort of the symbol of weakness. But what if the desert, what if the eremos, what if this solitude, what if the quiet place was actually a place of strength for Jesus? And what if it's not just a place of strength for Jesus, but what if you are going to actually step into the fullness of your calling each and every day, if you're going to step into the fullness of who you were created to be every single day, what if the eremos is a place of strength for you as well? What if that space in your day of solitude and quiet and stillness is actually what you need if you're going to fully be empowered to face what God is inviting you into? Now, what's interesting is that even after a month and a half in the eremos, it wasn't like some vacation before Jesus got to work. Because what we see is that after Jesus' first full day of work, he returns back to a solitary place. In fact, if you read throughout the Gospels, you'll see this pattern that the disciples of Jesus often had to go looking for Jesus because he would sort of slip away into quiet and lonely places. When they weren't sure where Jesus was, they probably had to ask themselves, where is nobody else? Where's the quietest place, the loneliest place? Because it would be there that they would find Jesus. And we see Jesus in Mark chapter 1, which is sort of a description of Jesus' first full day on the job. And we see that Jesus in his first full day on the job, after a month and a half in a solitary, lonely place in the eremos, he goes to the synagogue after waking up early and he teaches the crowds. He recruits his first followers. He heals Peter's mother-in-law over lunch. He healed some sick people. And before the end of the day, he had a conversation with the demon and then cast it out. That was his first day on the job. How was your first day? Probably a little easier than that. And what does Jesus do after his first day on the job? I don't know about you, but if that was my first day, I'd probably sleep in a little bit. I'd probably maybe go for a run, do a workout, get my energy back somehow, some way. But what does Jesus do? After his very first day of the job, we see it in Mark chapter 1, verse 35. It says this: very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place. The same word there is that word eremos. He returns to the eremos where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." So after only one day on the job, already crowds are clamoring for the attention of Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He makes sure before the day even really gets started to return to the eremos, to go back to that place of stillness and calm and peace and silence before anything else in the day occurs. And all this sort of begs the question: if Jesus needed a solitary place, then what makes you think that you don't need it as well? Like if Jesus needed a regular place where he would retreat into silence and solitude and stillness, if Jesus needed that, then what in the world makes us think that we don't need it that much more? I mean, here's the deal. When I wrote that this week, writing down this message, at no point did I write that thinking to myself, oh, people are going to disagree with that. You know, what a confrontational statement. No, like even if you're here and you don't believe in Jesus, believe in God, believe in Santa Claus, like you don't believe in anything, like you probably at least believe in that. That you're like, yeah, I need some silence and solitude in my life. I need some stillness in my life. I need some calm in my life. I don't know if I've ever met anyone who's like at peace and calm. And I'm like, so what's your secret, man? They're like, I just try and look for more noise. I just try and look for more stress. I just let the day happen. I have no control over I've never met a person with peace and calm that also does not have connected in their life deeply a rhythm of silence and solitude and stillness. So the chances are none of you actually disagree that we need this. I don't disagree with it. You don't disagree with it. So the real question is, if we all know that we need silence, solitude, and stillness, why do we suck at it so bad? Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but that's how I gotta put it. Like, why do we suck at solitude? Like, we know we need it. None of us are here saying, no, we need more noise. We need solitude, and yet we're so terrible at it. How do I know? Do you remember about mid-March 2020? When we were forced into a forced eremos? You know what I'm talking about? When the world shut down, your jobs were no longer allowing you to come in. Little did we know our lives were completely changing, but we were in that moment into a forced eremos. Did you notice how uncomfortable people were in that? Like for a day or so, we were good. But day 3, people were like, I need goals. I need to do things, right? And everyone's like, here's my COVID goals. Everyone's talking about, hey, here's my recipes I'm learning. Matt, thank you very much. They were delicious. We were so busy. We were given this gift of stillness, and we could only be still for like a day before we were like, no, I got to do something. Like I can't do this very long. I remember we were given this gift of noise, and what did we do? We binge watched Tiger King, right? And none of us are better people after watching Tiger King, but we did, and I'm guilty of that as well. It was incredibly fascinating. But we were given this forced eremos, and none of us, I don't know if any of us really took advantage of it. Why are we so uncomfortable with stillness? Why are we so uncomfortable with quiet? Why are we so uncomfortable with solitude? We say we know these things, and yet, when we were given the gift of being less busy, we just found new things to make us busy again. We struggle with solitude. In fact, it's gotten so bad right now, as of late, there's this new trend. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called dopamine detoxing. Has anyone heard about this? So it's this new thing sort of picking up steam. It's this idea of we need to detox from our hits of dopamine that we're taking all day, right? And that like on Instagram, checking your email, finishing the task list, all the things we do to I got a little hit of dopamine right there. This whole thing is about we need to actually take away those things, those dopamine hits, and actually just learn how to be where we are. So these new trends are coming not just out of nowhere, they're coming from the soul of humanity that's restless. It's tired, that knows we cannot live our lives moving from one dopamine hit to the next. We actually need to find a way to be calm again, to be still. And maybe I say again, maybe just to be calm for the first time in your life. And I'm no good at this either. How about you all? And there's a couple reasons I'm not great at silence and solitude and stillness. And I'm sure there's people much smarter than me that know why we struggle with this as humans, but here's 2 reasons I know I struggle, and maybe you can relate to them on some level. The first reason that I struggle with silence and solitude is because I'm hooked on performing. I am a recovering addict of achieving all the time. I don't know if anyone can relate to it, but I like to achieve. I don't like to be bored. I like to have tasks. I like to have goals. I like to make sure we're moving somewhere and doing something. And chances are I'm not the only one. Chances are some of you as well are hooked on performing. And you know why this addiction to performing makes solitude and silence and stillness so difficult? Because in silence, solitude, and stillness, you are stripped down and you can no longer perform. Because there's no one there to impress. There's nothing to do because you're not doing anything. You can't impress others. You can't impress yourself. You can't even impress God in silence and stillness and solitude. And for some of us, we even use prayer as a means not to be with God, but to try and impress God. Wasn't that a good prayer, God? That was awesome. I prayed for 10 minutes, King James Version, the whole nine. We can even use spirituality as a means to actually avoid the very thing that God wants, which is just to simply be with us as we are. But when you're sitting in silence, you can't perform anymore. And that's really difficult. When you enter into a space of silence and solitude, in that moment of silence and solitude, you are who you are, and you are where you are. And that's really, really hard if who you are and where you are is not who you want to be or where you want to be. But when you're in silence and solitude, all of a sudden, everything is stripped down to those 2 things. You are who you are and where you are. But here's the good news, and why silence and solitude is so beautiful, is because God, as I said earlier, is not wanting to meet who you pretend to be. He wants to meet who you really are. That God is not waiting for you in your future to arrive. He is waiting for you in your present to become awakened and to be still long enough to realize that He is there. You know what prayer is? It's being still long enough. And when you're still, it's like you're looking at God as God looks at you in love. Have you ever been still long enough to imagine what God sees when He sees you? And there's something about silence and solitude that's powerful because it's looking at God as God is looking at you. Like, have you ever had like someone look at you and you like, you know they like you, you know? Like Jenna, sometimes she'll look, she just winked at me. I'm like, ooh, girl, like there's moments that she looks at me and I'm like, man, she loves me, you know? Not a like freaky deaky sort of way, but maybe, I don't know, but like she looks, I'm like, oh, she likes me. It's amazing when like Finley, my daughter, there's these moments that she'll just like look at me and I know she's happy I'm there. And if you're not married and you don't have kids, let's keep moving to another example, like your dog. Come on, somebody. When you open the door and your dog's like looking at you like that and it just does something good for your soul. See, there's something about silence and stillness. It's like you look at God as God is looking at you in total love. There's something, I think there's a reason, this is off the cuff here, but like there's a reason John, he wrote the book of John, he's one of the disciples of Jesus, he nicknamed himself the one that Jesus loves. Like he was just convinced that God loves him. And I think it informed every part of his life. Probably annoying to all of his friends that he referred to himself as that, but really good for John, right? Like I think when you're still and calm and in the eremos, you can begin to bask in how God looks at you as you are. And just in case you forgot or didn't know, when God looks at you, he only feels love and compassion in his heart. But I got to stop performing long enough to see that, and that's hard for me. Anybody else? Is this hard for anybody else? Some performers in the room, you can admit it? All right. Yeah. Here's the second reason I struggle with silence and solitude, and this I think probably a lot of us can relate to, is I don't want to face myself. And silence and solitude has a way of forcing you to face your life as it is. That has a way of turning down the noise and stimuli in your life. And now in that moment of stillness, you actually have to face the real you, not the you on Instagram, not the you at work, not the you with friends and family, not the you with the person that you're trying to impress. No, the you that you really are. And for some of us, we don't want to be still long enough to face who we really are. It reminds me of a story that came out of NPR in 2018. They ran a story called 1 Square Inch of Silence. And there was this organization that took a group of people out to a rainforest in the middle of Washington State. And in this study, they took them out in this rainforest, and one person at a time would go to the middle of the rainforest where it was devoid of any man-made noise. And they had only one thing they needed to do: sit there in total silence for an hour. And they were surprised by what kept happening as these people would go out to complete silence, to be completely still. What they were surprised that all of a sudden people started feeling all these emotions. All of a sudden, they said almost everyone who went out to the middle of this rainforest in total silence and sat there, they started to cry. They started feeling all the things coming up to the surface, like a beach ball that you've been shoving underwater and let go of it finally, and it rushes to the top. That's what these people were experiencing. And even the journalist who wrote this story, he said he went out there in silence and in stillness, and he said he was surprised about how much that he realized he had not yet fully processed. And all it took was an hour of stillness and silence to bring it all to the surface. I think there's something about stillness and silence that is both good and also the very reason we try and avoid it is because it brings all of your life, the reality of your life, to the surface. In fact, let me just say this, that if prayer doesn't lead you closer to reality, you're doing it wrong. Like if prayer becomes a way that you're actually utilizing it to spiritually bypass, and I don't know if you've heard that phrase, spiritual bypassing. It's where we use like the Bible or scripture or a sermon or like these like Christian sayings or whatever. Like we use these things as a means to bypass reality, right? So somebody's like, man, I'm really struggling with anxiety. We're like, well, you should probably just like pray more. And it's like, well, you pray, but maybe therapy too. You know, like we acknowledge that, or somebody who had experienced maybe a death or a loss. You know, sometimes even well-intentioned Christians can bypass the pain of that by like trying to slap some little like well, I guess heaven needed another angel sort of thing. And that's spiritual bypassing, and it's not emotionally healthy. It's not okay. But we can do that with prayer. That we actually use prayer as a way of avoiding reality. But if you're avoiding reality through prayer, let me just say you're doing it wrong. Prayer at its truest, rawest, most beautiful form should not lead you away from reality. It should lead you deeper into it. It should lead you deeper into who you really are and what's really going on in your life. It reminds me of Psalm 46, verse 10, popular psalm. It says, "Be still and know that I'm God." The Hebrew word for be still here can also translate to mean let go. So you could accurately describe Psalm 46:10, translate Psalm 46:10 to actually say as well, let go and know that I'm God. It's interesting to me that the psalmist seemed to figure out there was a connection between deeper intimacy with God and us being still. That as you're still, you are positioning yourself to enter into deeper intimacy with God. He doesn't say, pray louder and know that I'm God. He doesn't say, even read the scriptures and know that I'm God. He doesn't say, go to church and know that I'm God. He doesn't say, ignore the pain and just think happy thoughts and know that I'm God. He says, be still and know that I'm God. Maybe it's because the psalmist knew something that Jesus lived out throughout his entire life here on this earth, and that is that our stillness and our intimacy and our relationship with God are intimately connected. That if you are still long enough, you might not only begin to see you for who you are, but you begin to see God for who God has always been. Now, I'm not great at silence and solitude, but I want to get better. How about you? I think my soul needs this. I think it longs for this. So I want to give you just a few ways that you can actually begin to live this out. A few tips, not formulas, but just maybe some starting points for you if you want to create a rhythm of solitude and silence, if you want to practice going into the eremos, not just on vacations, and not just in January when we're all excited about life and making goals, but like now, today, tomorrow, this week. How can you begin to enter into the eremos, experience silence, solitude, and stillness in your soul? The first is this, if you're taking notes, is context. How do you practice silence and solitude? The first priority is context. It's context, meaning where can you find silence and stillness, and when is the best opportunity for you to experience silence and stillness? Where in your context can you find it? And let me just say this, if you're like, there's literally no time in my day for it, then cut something out. Like I mean that in like love. If you're too busy to be still, you're too busy. Find a way to cut something out of your day to create silence and stillness and solitude. I promise you do this for 30 days, you are not going to feel worse. But you got to find the place and the time where that makes the most sense. Mine is early in the morning. Like mine is before the sun really gets up, and I get out of my bed, my kettle is on, I make pour over coffee, then I go over to my couch, same spot. My dog Riggins is always there waiting for me. It's amazing. He's there, I sit down, and for about an hour, I'm silent and I'm still. I don't do anything. It's not about achieving. It's about being. It's not about accomplishing. It's about resting. It's not about performing. It's about presence. And so I take that time because it's the best part of my day to be able to do that. Because I got a kid. When she wakes up, there is no quiet until she goes to bed, and then I'm tired, right? So this is, for me, the context that makes the most sense. That might work for you. It may not work for you. But the point is your context matters. Where can you find stillness and calm in your day? And how do you make that your time where you enter into the eremos? Doing it on the Muni is probably not a good idea, right? Trying to do it when you sit at your desk at work, probably, like unless you work at a monastery, probably not going to be the best context. So you got to find the space that works the most. And here's why this matters. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, it's interesting. Jesus is asked by his disciples, how do I pray? And here's Jesus' response. He says, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father. Why is that interesting? It's interesting because his disciples say, how do we pray? And Jesus doesn't tell them what to say or what to do as much. He says, here's where you need to go. Before he talks about how or what, he first talks about where. I've heard one author put it this way. He says, change of place plus change of pace equals change of perspective. So if you're needing a change of perspective in your day, change your place, change your pace. And you often get a change of perspective. That's why, like, when you're, maybe hitting a wall, maybe you're writing, creating content, and you go for a walk outside, all of a sudden, all the new ideas start coming. Change of place, change of pace, makes a change of perspective. That's what I'm talking about here. What's your place? How do you slow down the pace so that you can experience a change of perspective? Context matters. Second thing is this, consistency. You want to create a rhythm of silence and solitude in your life. You need context and you need consistency. If 1 hour is too long for you, that's fine. If 30 minutes is too long for you, that's fine. If you're like, bro, I can maybe do like 5 minutes before I start like foaming at the mouth and going crazy. All right, then do 5 minutes. It's okay. See, the issue here is not quantity of time, it's quality. And even more than quality, it's consistency. It's continuing to show up. And if it's only 5 minutes, if it's only 1 minute, let me just give you some peace of mind. God will work with whatever time you give him. God will work within whatever time frame you give him, and somebody who does 30 versus someone who does 1 minute, the 30-minute person is not more holy than the 1 minute person, because anyone who's done 30 started at 1. I'm at an hour. No way did I start at an hour. I would have died, right? So I started with what I could do, and you know what happened? I started to grow an appetite for it. I started to crave it a little bit more. And I can assure you that if you practice silence and solitude, the more and more you're going to be like, oh man, I need this. You're going to start craving it. Context and consistency. I love what Ron Rolheiser says. He says, the only rule of prayer is to show up. So if you're like, what's the rules of prayer? There's one, show up. That's it, just show up. And then the last thing I want you to understand when it comes to creating silence and solitude is communion. If you're anything like me, and I did this a lot at the beginning, and at times I still struggle with it, but I would be tempted to evaluate my time of silence and solitude. So I'd be like, I wasn't focused enough. I didn't get goosebumps this time, man. Like, what's the deal? I got distracted. I kept thinking about that meeting. I just wasn't. Stop. Don't evaluate. Don't grade. Just be. Just be. Because this isn't about religion. This is about relationship. And so I want you to invite you to think of this practice more as this. I'm giving this moment to God as an act of love. Maybe you just say that before you go silent. God, I'm giving you this moment right now as an act of love. And maybe that's more for you than it's for God. Like maybe you just need to hear yourself say that, to give yourself permission to not grade the experience, but just to be in it. God, I'm giving you this act right now, this moment as an act of love. So how do you find some quiet in your soul in a world that just doesn't shut up? Find the right place in time, context. Keep showing up consistently. And remember, this thing's about relationship, not religion. It's about communion. And continue to show up offering God an act of love by being present in that moment. Eric, if you want to come up, we'll wrap up in a moment here. I want to close with one thing here because I hope that maybe there's something within you that's like, yeah, I need this. I need some silence. I need some solitude. Like I'm gonna find the place and the time. I'm gonna keep showing up, and I'm gonna just be present with God. I hope that there's a desire welling up there. But I want to just close with this thing that I kind of found interesting. In Luke chapter 11, Jesus' disciples, they asked Jesus this really surprising question. Jesus' disciples asked Jesus, would you teach us how to pray? And I thought that was a really interesting and surprising question, and here's why that question's so surprising. You may not know this. It's the only time recorded in all of Scripture that any of Jesus' disciples asked Jesus to teach them how to do something. The only time Jesus' disciples said, teach us how to do something, it was this, teach us how to pray. Why is that interesting? Because they saw Jesus do some crazy things. They saw Jesus teach to thousands of people, and he captivated audiences. And yet they did not ask, Jesus, teach us how to teach. They saw Jesus feed thousands of people with just a couple loaves of bread and a few fish, and yet they did not say, Jesus, teach us how to feed thousands of people with very little. They saw Jesus heal the blind. They even saw Jesus raise the dead, and yet they did not ask Jesus, teach us how to do miracles. So it's interesting, of all the things they saw, the only thing they asked Jesus to teach them how to do was to pray. Now, I don't know why that's the case exactly, but I have a theory. I think that they saw the intimate relationship that Jesus had with the Father. I think they stepped into the Eremos so many times trying to find Jesus, and they would see him in stillness, in silence, and in complete calm and peace. And they saw it, and they were like, man, that would be nice. I think they saw everything Jesus was doing, from his miracles to his teachings to him raising the dead, and I think they made a connection that the things he was doing in his life was connected to his intimate relationship that he had with God. I think they realized that something deep and beautiful was happening every time Jesus slipped away in the early morning hours to pray. They saw Jesus' rich communion with God. And I think they saw that even though Jesus lived a very busy and active life where thousands of people clamored for Jesus' attention, that even with all the noise, Jesus always had a peace and calm and a stillness about him. And I think they saw that and they're like, I think it's how he prays. I think it's connected to how he doesn't just talk to God, but it's like God talks to him. I think they deduced that Jesus, he knew something about what God was after, and they wanted that as well. And my prayer for us as a church, for each and every one of you individually, is that we would long for the same things that these disciples longed for. That we would long for that deep and intimate, meaningful relationship. That we would long for the stillness and calm and peace that only the Spirit of God can give each and every one of us. And I believe that we will never experience that without silence and solitude being a regular practice of our lives. So, may you learn that God is in the Eremos, that God is in the stillness, and God is in the silence. And may the Eremos free you from non-stop performing. And may the Eremos free you to face reality instead of running from it. And while I hope you learn how to talk to God, I hope even more you will discover the power of creating space for God to talk to you. Because if you do, I believe you will discover that there are some things that God can only do in your life in the quiet.